Awesome. We're at it again with the WoundCasters podcast. Today's guest is Gadi Borkow, the chief scientist for MedCu, starting the copper revolution in wound care. And I can tell you, I've been very excited about this product ever since I discovered it. And I think you're going to be just as excited about it after the end of this episode. So let's talk with Dr. Borkow about his experience in developing the product and why they call it a copper revolution. So, Gadi, why don't you tell us a little bit about the copper revolution? Why copper? Because there's so many silver products out there, and we really don't do much with other metals in wound care. So why copper?
So why copper? So first of all, copper is a natural element that we need to consume on a daily basis. An adult has to consume approximately 1 milligram a day. Copper is actually involved in all of our tissues. Without consuming copper, we would not be having this conversation. But why copper in the wound healing battle? So there are two core properties of copper that make it a very, very important and agent to be used in the wound healing battle. First of all, copper is a wide spectrum antimicrobial. It has, when also bacteria, as us, they need copper in order to survive. But above a certain exposure, above a certain concentration, when they are exposed, they cannot survive and they are killed. And the kill mechanism is also very significant because the way that the microorganisms are damaged is through a multi-site kill mechanism. So it's not that one particular mutation will endure the bacteria who is exposed to the copper to resistance to copper. Because it's a non-specific kill mechanism, it's very hard for microorganisms to develop resistance to copper.
Hmm.
So copper, first of all, damages the bacterial cell wall. It allows the penetration of the copper ions into the bacterial internal parts, where it damages the genetic materials, once again in a non-specific way, and also it interacts with different proteins and it impedes their physiological activity. So this multi-site kill mechanism is obviously very advantageous when we're talking about wound healing, because you want to prevent any capacity of the microorganisms to develop resistance to copper. So this is the first property, the antimicrobial property of copper. But copper has also a very important function in the wound healing physiological processes. Copper in our body, as I said, it's involved in all of our tissues. In order to produce, in order to heal a wound, you need to produce new blood capillaries, what's called angiogenesis. And copper is essential in the production of new blood capillaries. For example, in addition, copper has been shown to stimulate the secretion of extracellular matrix proteins like elastin, collagen. So all these extracellular matrix proteins, which give the strength and elasticity to the skin, copper is involved in their production and secretion from the dermal fibroblasts. So obviously, this was the basis in our thoughts why to choose copper, and that was the main reason we decided to use copper in this in order to be involved in this what we call the wound healing battle.
Yes, absolutely. So do have a few questions for you on copper and its antimicrobial properties. A friend of mine is from India, and when he found out about the copper dressing, he's like, "Yeah, we've been using copper for thousands of years to sterilize water to make it safe to drink." But the copper pots and pans that he was referring to are elemental copper. I think what you have in your product is ionic copper bonded to a sulfate, from my understanding.
No, no. First of all, indeed, I was in a conference many years ago in India, and I gave many historical examples of the use of copper in the fight against pathogens. Already the Egyptians, the Greeks, I'm talking about the ancient
Right.
Egyptians, the Greeks, etc., they use copper, and I gave many different examples, and they use copper in the fight against the pathogens without really knowing why it works. And then at the end of the conference, somebody raised the hand and say, "Why don't you ask us or tell us about, this the use in India of copper?" And I wasn't aware of that. So they keep the water overnight, the Hindu, in copper vessels, and
Right.
they call it the holy water, and they drink it the next day. So yes, that's metallic copper. And today, metallic copper is being used also in hospitals, etc., to reduce to the risk of what's called nosocomial infections, hospital-acquired infections. But actually, when people have done analysis of what is the active ingredient in these solid metallic surfaces, it's actually the oxidized copper, because the copper, when it comes in
Mm,
contact with the oxygen, some of that becomes oxidized. So the copper oxide is actually the most active antimicrobial particle or ingredient. And we, in our wound dressings, we start with the most active form of copper, which is the cuprous oxide, Cu2O. And that cuprous oxide, there are microparticles which are embedded in the polymeric substrate of our dressings. And this cuprous oxide, actually, they release, in the presence of humidity, copper ions. So we don't have any sulfate or anything like that. We use cuprous oxide microparticles. And the reason is
gotcha.
because it's really the most active in terms of antimicrobial.
Interesting. So when we talk about the antimicrobial properties, the other question I have there for you is: it strictly against bacteria, or how does it act against viruses and fungi as well?
So the antimicrobial kill mechanism, let's call it that way, is very similar in terms of damaging the fungi and damaging the bacteria and damaging the viruses. And actually, both bacteria and fungi, they, as I said before, they need copper as part of their physiological way of being alive organism. And they have different ways, because copper is very reactive. They have different ways to control the internal concentration of copper. They have, for example, pumps that, when they have too much copper inside the cell, the pumps throw away the excess of copper. Or they have chaperones which actually bind the copper and deliver the copper ions into where they are needed. But as I said before, above a certain concentration, they do not have enough ways to control the excess of copper, and then they start to see damage in multi-sites. Viruses, they do not have any way they do not have pumps to throw away the excess of copper or any chaperones, so they are actually even more susceptible to copper, uh, basically, than bacteria or fungi. And for example, copper was found to be a highly effective antiviral agent in the recent pandemic, in the COVID pandemic, because it kills the SARS virus that causes COVID. So there were actually masks made from containing cuprous oxide microparticles in order to reduce the risk of cross contamination and of people getting the virus. So copper, as I said, is a wide spectrum biocide, including against viruses, bacteria, and fungi. And actually, it's considered a very good fungicide. For example, in the wine industry, grapes, already in the 18th century, people were using what was called the Bardon mix, which is actually a soluble solution of copper that they used to spray, or they still, in some places, they spray it on grapes to prevent, fungi or fouling.
Mm. So this is still interesting to me. So knowing that we us as humans have used copper for thousands of years, like you said, going back to the ancient Egyptians and Greeks even, for these antimicrobial properties, why has it taken so long to bring copper into wound care?
So I think actually copper has been in use also for preventing, as I said, biofouling, etc. Recent until the antibiotics and even to treat infections or things like that. But when the antibiotics appeared, actually everybody got rid of the use of copper and they started to use antibiotics. But the problem with antibiotics is that bacteria, in less than 50 years of using antibiotics, they are highly resistant, antibiotic resistant bacteria like MRSA, methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus. So these bacteria, they with 1, 2, 3, 4 mutations, they are completely resistant to the antibiotics. And that's why there is a return, if you want to call it that way, in the use of wide spectrum, non-specific antimicrobial agents like copper. So I think that part of the reason why, people are not using any more antibiotics because of the problem of development of resistance, and they're coming back to using copper. And the question is, today there are many, many silver containing wound dressings. There are not too many. We are, as far as we know, we are the only company which has a wound dressing with copper that has been cleared by the FDA, has been cleared by the European notified body to be used clinically in the US, in Europe, but also right now we're in 25 countries already, and our dressings are being used clinically. And when you look at the literature, you see that more and more and more studies are being published in the academia, showing the very good antimicrobial properties of copper in terms and I mean in the use of different copper compounds in the use in the battle of the wound healing.
Yeah.
So this is gaining
So
momentum, and I'm sure that in a few years there will be many, many copper containing dressings out there.
sure. No, I mean, I can tell you from my clinical experience, it's an absolutely incredible dressing, and I want to get into some of the patient experiences that I have had with that in a little bit. But how long have you guys been commercially available? I think it's only been what 2, 3, 4 years. It's you're a fairly young company.
Yes, which the company was established in by the end of 2016. Actually, at the beginning of 2017, it took us a few years to be able to to develop the product, to do all the biocompatibility required studies in order to get to demonstrate safety and efficacy, and to apply to the regulatory bodies. And I think we started to, let's say, patients started to be treated with our dressing somewhere around 2019, by the 2020. But in every country, as I said, we are currently approximately 25 countries, and in each country we have a local distributor. So in every place, it has to go through the regulatory and registration process, reimbursement process, etc. Each country with its own specificities, and then you have to introduce it into the market. So it's a very slow process, but I would say we are about we're actually getting now much more track, etc. Because we're starting to get published and known. People are starting to use our dressings, and I would say in the last couple of years, and that's why you know about us only from the last 2 years, because before that we were not really in the market.
Right. No, but my point really is that in this very short amount of time, you're now in 25 countries. I think that speaks volumes to the dressing, right? For people to adopt it that quickly and that on such a broad scale internationally, I think speaks volumes about this dressing and its efficacy and what it can do in the wound healing world. And so that's really the point I was trying to make there, is that you guys are onto something here with this dressing. And I guess just to be on the clear side too, MedCu for people who are listening who don't know about this copper dressing. It is an alginate type dressing, falls into the alginate category, although technically, I think my understanding is it's really a hydrofiber, not a true classic alginate. So can you speak to that at all about the composition of the dressing and how it comes?
Yes, you're correct. Basically, the dressing has two layers, or depending of the construction, because we have different constructions, but basically are two layers. One layer is a non-woven, non-adherent layer, which is the one that has to come in contact with the wound bed. It allows the passage of the wound exudate to the second layer, which is a highly absorbent layer. And the highly absorbent layer is a mixture of polymeric fibers with it's not hydro fibers, but they are fibers that have micro capsules, if you want to call it that way, of hydro fiber, which are able to capture the exudate. So that's why it's under under that category in the US, for example.
Right, right. And I think the important part too is, again, from my understanding, the way these fibers are designed, they trap the fluid inside. So it's not a wicking fiber where it goes in on one side and then ultimately comes out the other end. It's something, once the fluid is in the dressing, it gets trapped inside the dressing. It doesn't get released again into the wound bed or surrounding tissues.
Well, the absorption of the exudate, it's vertical. In other words, it goes from the wound bed to the other layer. And then if, for example, it's a highly exudating wound, you can add a secondary dressing, nitro-gel, for example, and the exudate will go through. Now, you don't get maceration because the dressing, as I said, it's a vertical transmission. So the exudate does not go to the peri-wound. And that's why you don't see maceration when using our dressings. Now, it's not that it's not exactly that all the liquid is captured and it doesn't become like a gel, it's a nitro-gel, but it actually passes the wound exudate. Obviously, today the dressing are supposed to be used up to 7 days because we showed that we kill above 4 logs, meaning more than 99.99% of the bacteria or microorganisms that come in contact with the dressing, even when it's completely full, we won't exudate for 7 days. So there's enough copper there to kill more than 99.99% of the bacteria on the dressing, even after 7 days. We did not check what happens after 7 days because usually you don't use a dressing more than 7 days. I mean, it's quite unusual. So that's the mechanism of absorption.
Yeah. So it can stay in place for up to 7 days, let's say. It has ongoing bacterial killing, microbial killing, I should say. Is there how does it compare to the silver dressings? And the reason I'm asking is I remember reading a study years ago when I first became aware of the copper dressing that actually showed significant reduction in bacteria over time, very early on even, compared to silver dressings, some of which actually increased bacterial colony counts during the duration of the study.
I'm not sure exactly to what study you're referring to, but what I can tell you, today there's so many different silver dressings, and some of them have very potent antimicrobial efficacy, but when we compare ourselves in our lab to different commercially available silver dressing, we see that some of them did not show good antimicrobial efficacy in the period of time that we studied them. And some of them did show good antimicrobial efficacy. It depends, the antimicrobial efficacy depends of many factors. For example, how much copper or how much silver is there in the dressing. If you have enough silver, you will be able to kill the bacteria. If you don't have enough silver, it may take longer, or actually the bacteria may not be killed by the silver dressing. So it depends very much how much silver there is. So it's hard to say copper versus silver. It really depends. Wound dressing versus wound dressings. And when we compare ourselves to the dressings out there, For example, we incubated MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, approximately 1 million bacteria on our dressings, and we compare them with 10 different commercially available dressing. You can see that 7 out of them did not show any reduction in the titers of the bacteria within 1 hour of incubation at 37 degrees, while 3 of those silver dressing did show good efficacy, but once again, our dressing completely eliminated the bacteria within 1 hour. So it's a dressing to dressing comparison rather than silver versus dressing comparison, silver versus copper comparison.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. What kind of wounds is your dressing used for? Is it just the chronic wounds that are hard to heal that we see in the wound clinic all the time, or is there some use even in more acute wounds like burn wounds, which tend to have a much higher incidence of infection? It seems like there's potentially a role for that as well in trying to decrease the bioburden in those massive burn wounds. So, what wounds would you say your dressing really is designed for?
So our wound dressings are clear to be used in pressure ulcers, in diabetic ulcers, in venous ulcer, arterial wounds, burns, first degree and second degree, and any other, chronic wounds that you can think of. In terms, we're also clear to be treated to treat acute wounds. And for example, in post-op wound, when you use our dressing, you reduce the risk of infection of the wound, of the essence. So in that sense, our dressings are being used not only in chronic wounds, but they can be used also in acute wounds. Currently, several of the publications that we published were done in diabetic ulcers, but we have very good results in venous ulcers. We have very good results basically also in burns. When you look at the burn and you use our dressing, actually, as you said, there's a reduction of the risk of infection, and you get very good results as well.
Yeah. I mean, across the board, that's been my experience, which is why this dressing has become my go-to standard first kind of dressing for exudating wounds. If the wound is dry, then the algorithm changes. But if the wound is wet and is draining, usually copper ends up being my first choice for all the reasons that you've already discussed. And one thing that I noticed over the last few years is when I switched patients from a silver dressing to a copper dressing, uh, by and large, everybody, with the exception of one patient, I can only think of one patient who had the opposite effect, but everybody said the dressing was more comfortable than the silver dressing. And I can't help but think, and I come at this from my daughter who's allergic to everything under the sun, that silver allergies or metal allergies are much more common than we may even recognize. And I feel like because copper is so much more important to our natural physiology, not just in wounds, but just in general, that the allergic reaction to copper isn't quite as common as an allergic response to, let's say, silver. Do you have any insights on that at all, or is this just me having some weird clinical experience with the dressing?
No, so I can tell you today, we estimate that approximately 100,000 wounds have been treated with our dressing, and we have not received even one adverse reaction, and certainly not an allergic reaction. Now, when you talk about allergy to copper, as I said, copper is an essential mineral that we need to consume on a daily basis. So,
Right.
but when we're talking about the dermal contact, is there really a dermal allergic effect that may happen? And there is a discussion actually in the literature because some cases have been described of an allergy to copper, but those studies were conducted, with metallic copper, for example, earrings or bracelets. And there is
Mm.
a discussion: is it really an allergic reaction to copper, or was it an allergic reaction to some impurities in those metallic objects? So at least with our dressings, we have never seen any allergic reaction, and it's not surprising that sometimes people report an, an adverse reaction, let's call it that way, to a silver dressing, because silver is not a natural element that our body utilizes. Silver, we cannot metabolize silver. It's not something that our body recognizes or uses. So it's not surprising that you may see more adverse reactions with silver dressings. And
Yeah.
if we're talking about
And
that
actually,
already, yes,
no,
actually.
finish your thought. Finish your thought.
No, no, what I was about to say, silver dressings, for example, in many of them are limited to be used, for 3 or 4 weeks, and mainly they are used in infected wounds. They will not be used in non-infected wounds because silver may have those adverse reactions. In Europe, for example, we can use our dressings throughout the whole wound healing process, from skin rupture all the way to skin closure, without any
Hmm.
limitation. In other words, also in non-infected wounds, because to protect them, etc. And there is no risk of any adverse reaction or accumulation of any copper in the wound that may be uh, toxic or anything like that. There's no such a thing. Our dressings are very, very safe to be used throughout the continuum of wound care.
Yeah. That's actually a thought I had just now too. Because silver is not an element that we need, I feel like it just gets stuck in the local wound bed and never gets excreted again. It just kind of builds up, and who knows what kind of long-term reactions that has. And I don't think we really understand that. But copper is something that we should be able to metabolize and get rid of. So it's not something that should get stuck in the wounds forever. Unlike silver, which would actually make it a whole lot more biocompatible with the human body than a silver dressing.
That is correct. That is correct. And there with silver there is the pro. In some cases, you get agria, which means coloration of the skin with a silver.
Sure.
Sorry, you don't get that with copper. You don't see any coloration of the skin. You don't see anything like that. So even from a cosmetic point of view, there is an advantage of using the copper dressings.
Yeah. Another question that I think people might that has happened to me twice now, and it came from patients both times. If you think of copper out there, whether it's a copper roof or the Statue of Liberty, right? Over time, that copper turns green. And I've had two. I remember I have two patients ask me when I first started the dressing on them. So is it going to stay orange or is it going to turn green with time? Do you have any experience with that over time? I can't say I've seen it. I've definitely seen green exudates being captured by the dressing, but I've not seen the dressing itself discolor over time.
Right. So as you said, some of the exudates, like Pseudomonas aeruginosa, they secrete some kind of a green color or exudate. With the silver, with the copper dressings, I can tell you that maybe I got one or twice some feedback that the exudate became greenish, as you said. Now, what I think may be happening, and that wasn't any problem, anything like that, just a color of the exudate, which, as you said, may turn green. And some of the bacteria, they secrete sulfur containing compounds. Now, sulfur may
Mhm.
interact with copper, and then you may get like the copper sulfate, which is a greenish type of color, and that may be the explanation for those two particular cases. It depends, I guess, of the bacteria that colonizes the wound. Uh, but that's not really an issue. We have seen it in a couple of cases, and actually, the wounds in those cases healed, and they got rid of the exudate.
Yeah. No, I have definitely seen wounds that hadn't responded to other dressings respond, and they started to clean up. Yeah, definitely go from that inflammatory stage to the proliferative stage in about 2 to 4 weeks time, when they had completely stalled beforehand, and all of a sudden we have less exudate, less biofilm. We've got more granulation going, and so when I started seeing that in my clinical practice with the dressing on wounds that have been there for months or even years, I was sold, right? Because, and then you add on top of that the patients generally across the board saying, "Wow, this dressing is way more comfortable than all the other stuff you've tried on me." It really was a no brainer for me to make this my number one choice for exudating wounds. So, how do people get access to this dressing? If they're interested, curiosity got piqued. What's the best way for them to figure out how to get access to the dressing?
Well, as I said before, in each country we have a local distributor. In the US, we have a local representative, and you can always, through the website, order the dressing directly and purchase it, or through different local distributors. In the US, you have so many distributors, so you can get them. It depends. I cannot tell you a particular name because every place is a different local distributor. But we are working with many different distributors and different hospitals already in the US, which I understand that's where you're located. And basically, but even if they don't have a local distributor that can supply the dressing, they can always get it directly from us through the net.
And I think that's an important point to make because I have had a lot of patients who, through especially early on, our distributors at the wound clinic I was at didn't carry the dressing, and it was impossible to get. And the patients, when I talked to them about the dressing, said, "You know what? This does sound like the right dressing for me. I definitely want to give this a try." And they just went on the website and purchased it themselves without going through the usual channels. And so I think that's an important point to make, that anybody can have access to the dressing by just going to your website, purchasing the dressing as a patient, even, right? Or you don't need to even be in the hospital. Obviously, if you are in a hospital setting, going with a distributor, talking with the rep, and getting a better supply chain is worth your time. But for patients themselves, if it's something you want to try, you can just go on the website and purchase it, which is I think that's pretty awesome. And I've had numerous patients do that, just purchase it straight off the website. Gadi, it's been an absolutely wonderful conversation. Is there anything we haven't touched on that you really think people should know about copper?
Well, I think we call it the copper revolution. I think, today we're the first one. As I said, our dressings have been used in more than 100,000 patients very, very successfully. And there are clear advantages over silver. And I think more and more people are going to start using our dressings. And this is the future because, uh, you know, uh, this is the way to go. Copper has very, very good antimicrobial properties and very good effect on the wound, and you should have. And I'm not surprised that more and more people are using that. I'm highly optimistic, and the wound healing battle is very, very difficult, and I think really the usage of copper dressings are the new way to really fight those wounds, and this is a ongoing revolution.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. I mean, I think, again, like I said before, the fact that you guys in just a few short years expanded to 25 countries and you've treated over 100,000 wounds with this dressing in really just a short period of time, I think speaks volumes about the efficacy of this dressing and what clinicians see when they start using this dressing, in terms of how fast they can heal wounds, how much better they can heal wounds, how much better they clean up, how much faster the granulation tissue develops, how wounds start to respond that hadn't responded to other dressings before. Have I had wounds that copper hasn't worked on? Yeah, absolutely. But by and large, across the spectrum, copper has had way more responses. Has been way more responsive to wounds than any other dressing I've ever tried. So it's a wonderful dressing, and I thank you for bringing it to the market, for developing the product, and making it available, because it's a game changer. And I think to call it a revolution is absolutely accurate. And so thank you for everything you have done to get it to this point. And thank you for being here today and having this wonderful conversation with me. We'll make sure that your website is linked in the description below so that people can check it out and reach out to their respective reps in whatever country they're in. Or if they're in a country where the copper isn't at yet, maybe they can add that to your list.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Baker. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you.
Yes, no, absolutely. Thank you. The pleasure's really been mine. It's been a wonderful conversation. We had a lot of great insights, and thanks for your time today.